Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our House Appropriations Committee meeting. At this time, we'll have the roll call. Okay, clerk, you may close the roll. We have this afternoon, we have 4 bills come before us, and then a report on early childhood education.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The first bill on the docket, this is the report of the Commerce, Ag, and Natural Resources Subcommittee. First bill before the committee is House Bill 1676. This bill removes the July 1st, 2025 sunset from a program that allows a locality.
Delegate Sickles.
I have a motion.
Delegate Sickles.
I move that we report HB 1676.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded that we report HB 1676. Members, please cast your vote. That bill reports 19-0.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The next bill on the docket is House Bill 1702 from Delegate Bulova. There's a subcommittee substitute.
Move the substitute.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the bill before the committee amends the Urban Public-Private Partnership Redevelopment Fund designed to help localities with the high cost of developing land in dense communities.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we report HB 1702.
It's been moved and seconded that we report HB 1702 with the substitute. Members, please cast your vote. Clerk may close the roll. That bill reports 19-0.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. The next bill before the committee is House Bill 1948 from Delegate Bulova. This bill establishes the Abandoned Mine Land Grant Retention Fund that allows the Department of Energy to retain federal funding received from the Infrastructure Investment Jobs Act through the Abandoned Mine Grant Program.
Chairman, I move the committee report HB 1948.
It's been moved and seconded that HB 1948 be reported. Members, please cast your vote. Clerk may close the roll. That bill reports 19-0.
Next, Mr. Chairman, is House Bill 2077 from Delegate Krizik.
Move the substitute.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this bill would expand the eligibility for loans and grants from the Community Flood Preparedness Fund to include federally recognized and Virginia recognized tribes. There is no fiscal impact as a result of the bill.
Mr. Chairman, I move that we report the substitute to HB 2077.
It's been moved and seconded that we report HB 2077 with the substitute. Members, please cast your vote. Clerk may close the roll. That bill reports 19-0. That concludes all of our bills for the day. At this time, I want to invite Ms. Gina Conway, Deputy Superintendent of Early Child Care and Education from the Virginia Department of Education, come before us. Ms. Conway, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'll go ahead and get started while we're waiting for the slides to come up. I'm Jenna Conway, Deputy Superintendent of Early Childhood Care and Education at the Virginia Department of Education. I'm pleased to present to the chair and the committee this afternoon an update on the early childhood landscape, a sharing of the findings from the report of the Commission on Early Childhood that was requested by this body, an overview of the governor's proposed budget, and then be prepared to take any questions that the committee might have. There we go. Yeah, all right. First, I want to provide a brief update on current early childhood enrollment. Do we have this? Oh, there they are. Perfect. At a very high level, wanted to let the body know that we are continue to see very high enrollment across the 3 state-funded early childhood programs. The Child Care Subsidy Program, which supports full day, full year via vouchers across family child care and child care programs across the state. The Mixed Delivery Program, which also supports full day, full year birth to 5, and the Virginia Preschool Initiative. As you see in this slide, we're at or slightly above enrollment for child care subsidy and mixed delivery, and just slightly under the allocated enrollment for the Virginia Preschool Initiative. Thanks to House Bill 419 and Senate Bill 54, including Patron Bulova here in the committee, the department is now charged with reallocating dollars that are not used for a particular program, in this case, the Virginia Preschool Initiative. And as of this month, have been able to take dollars that were unused by Virginia Preschool Initiative following the fall enrollment, so following the opportunity for every child that wanted a VPI slot to obtain one, to be able to reallocate a first round of $5.2 million to serve about 830 children, and have an additional $3 million this month to be able to turn into child care subsidy slots, meaning at high level, sir, that we are allocating every single dollar dedicated through Section 125.10 of the Virginia budget. We still are experiencing unmet need. So 125.10 of the Virginia budget also required all 3 state programs to create wait list if there is need that goes and above and beyond the slots allocated by this body. As you see by this chart here, we see significant unmet demand for infant and toddler slots, as well as preschool and school-age kids. Over 8,700 kids on the birth to 5 waitlist for child care subsidy, and an additional 1,300 kids on the mixed delivery waitlist. To clarify, as been asked before, this is not about you're waiting at a center and need a spot to open up. This is you have found a spot at a center or family child care, but you need that voucher to be able to afford it. At this time, we do not have any wait lists. As we noted before, Virginia Preschool Initiative was slightly underutilized this year. We also think, based on preliminary analysis, that there's very little overlap across these wait lists, but these give you the wait list numbers for the state. I do want to flag that although you probably heard when I presented in the fall that these wait lists were growing at an extremely high rate, we have seen a slowing of that rate. And so this presents the month over month, and what you see sort of month to month growth is significantly lower from November to present than it was in that beginning stage when we first created the wait list. The blue line is the overall, all children on wait lists, all ages. The orange line is the infant and toddler wait list. We shared this slide with the commission, and it's an important part of the early childhood landscape just to help understand when we talk about families that are participating in child care subsidy or on these growing wait lists. You'll see that they're represented across the state in different industries, the highest of which is health and human services, followed by education, and then manufacturing, construction, and retail. These are in-person jobs that truly parents require the support of a voucher or a slot in mixed delivery or VPI to be able to go to work in order to afford and have a place for their young children to go. Amazon continues to be the single largest employer. You also note that 97 out of our 131 school divisions have employees of those school divisions who are also receiving or on the wait list for child care subsidy. So child care subsidy is also helping ensure we have enough staffing in our public schools. And then last but not least, just a brief update, making sure in terms of a really important part of the early childhood landscape is that we have a statewide accountability system known as VQB5 that's present in every city and county in Virginia. This is a quality measurement and accountability system connected to kid outcomes. We know that 98% of the programs are positively impacting kids and meet expectation. We know that 60% of these programs are in private settings. 85% are using quality curriculum. What it means when you think about the very significant historic investments this body has made in early childhood, that you know there can be a positive return on investment because we are measuring every single classroom every single year across 11,000 classrooms and 3,200 sites. With that in mind, I wanted to share just the high-level takeaways from the report commissioned by this body that asked us to look at co-payments, look at work requirements, look at attendance, and look at our priorities. We meet very closely in partnership with the Secretary of Education and the Early Childhood Foundation. The Commission of Early Childhood Care and Education includes several large group meetings for several hours, had work groups, and they presented a December 1 report. It's important to note that the context of this report reflects monthly updates for the commission on those wait lists. And so the compromises and the consensus proposed here reflects that slots for high quality early childhood in Virginia are more scarce than ever before. And so the state is making some tough trade-offs when you think about how do we maximize the dollar. In that spirit, there was consensus that it would be reasonable to increase family co-payments, but make sure that they stay below the 7%, or now is the federal rule about what is a sort of considered a reasonable co-payment. We need to prioritize working family. If we have 9,000 birth to 5 children on the wait list, and we have some parents who are looking but maybe not able to find work or have the ability to support the care needs of their children, while we have other families on the wait list who are actively working, how we can strike a reasonable balance around allowing parents, if they lose their job, to look for work, but also prioritizing working families. We've got to improve attendance. I'll share some data in a moment that we share with the commission, and then recognizing that there are multiple options for after school, but only one real option for infant toddlers. How do we as a state prioritize birth to 5 children? With that in mind, I'll switch to the governor's budget, which is really an effort to leverage what is Virginia's, at least as we understand it, highest ever one-year state investment in early childhood, $462 million. What the governor's proposed budget would do, it would be to implement the 4 policy levers recommended by the Early Childhood Commission. Doing that with the parameters set forth in this budget would enable the Commonwealth to bring 7,000 birth to 5 children off wait list with existing state dollars, so without any additional investment. It also proposes, recognizing there still are challenges around supply, particularly in child care deserts across the state, a one-time $15 million to allow localities to retrofit existing spaces and build more supply. And it proposes that we sort of not affect any school-age child who's currently on subsidy, that they would continue to receive that voucher, but that for the future, pausing enrollment until we can get a handle on how do we provide consistent and quality after school across the multitude of federal, state, and locally funded resources. So this would launch a work group to tackle that issue that would report to the commission and then put a pause on additional enrollment after July 1st. Again, not affecting any current participants on the program. This chart just provides a brief breakdown of where the slots come from what was initially baked into the FY26 budget to how many additional slots you can get if you increase co-payments. That would be $5 per month for families under the poverty line and 7% of income for groups above, from 101 to up to 85% of state median income. If you limit the job search, gives you about another 1,000 kids off the wait list. And then if you remove the local composite index cap for the Virginia Preschool Initiative, allows you to serve another 687 children this year. So again, in total, that's 7,000 slots that you can get with the very same investment that you have currently set for FY26. For mixed delivery, making some of these changes around co-payments will allow you to add an additional 100 slots, so 2,630 slots as compared to 2,530 in FY25.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Rasul, we're going to wait until the presentation is complete before we take questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
The language is here that's in the budget, just to sort of explain each of the 4 areas. I just wanted to briefly share some important data that has influenced the commission and the approach on attendance. What these 2 charts show for both child care subsidy and for the Virginia Preschool Initiative, that we have seen a significant increase in the number of young children that are not regularly coming to either VPI or to childcare. Little kids get sick, babies get more sick than toddlers, toddlers get more sick than preschool. But if you compare this to pre-pandemic numbers, you see a really significant shift in the wrong direction, and figuring out how do we get back to regular attendance, which actually promotes better school readiness outcomes and helps kids and families develop sound routines that you'll see pay off in elementary school attendance and beyond. Lastly, just a little bit of detail on school age before I'll open it up for questions. As I noted before, the goal here is to preserve the slots that we have for school age via the child care subsidy program, but to recognize that we have to take a step back because this spending has grown so significantly. And as I noted before, there's the greatest unmet need for infants and toddlers. So the budget proposes a work group that would include a variety of stakeholders, bring them to the table, look at where we have resources, where we don't have resources, look at how we cost and pay for these public after-school and summers programs, and what we might think about in terms of expectations for quality. This is critically important because we're now with this sort of scarce resource, and remember now your early childhood funding reflects both state and federal funding. So some of what you've designated for early childhood is actually supporting school age. This has peaked at almost $100 million a year, which is an average of $8 million a month, even though you're already paying for public school for these kids 9 of 12 months. So our concern is we need to preserve the kids who are currently in the program. There's also a need to take a step back and right-size these rates. Currently, because of how the program is structured, how rates have been sort of grandfathered in over time, you're now paying more per hour for after school than you might be even for infant and toddler care, which doesn't make sense when you think about the ratios, right? Infant care is so expensive because it's 1-to-4 ratios. You can go up to 20 plus kids when you're talking about 6, 7, and 8-year-olds. So with that, Chair, I'll pause there and see what questions the committee might have.
Delegate Rasul.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Jenna, for your presentation and all the great information. My question is, I'm not a fan of the proposals that have come from the governor, in particular saying that we should double the co-pays on working families, certainly during this time. But if we were to accept all of the recommendations from the governor, would that completely eliminate the wait list?
No, it would not, Delegate.
And what further question, Mr. Chair?
Delegate Rasul.
About what would be the distance between what we believe the governor's proposal would do versus where we're at with the current wait list?
Certainly. So the governor's proposal is just over 7,000 for 7,000 birth to 5 slots. So that leaves just about 1,600 child care subsidy waitlist children that there's not currently funding for, and about 1,300 mixed delivery children. And then also there's just under 3,900 school age children. So none of those slots are currently funded in the governor's budget.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Corner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'm struggling with the gap between our work on the Early Childhood Commission and our recommendations versus what's in the proposed budget. And being all in the same presentation is a little hard to decipher between some of those. So looking at where we started with the commission, and there are several commission members on here, so others feel free to help in this area. But just looking at the attendance in particular, we didn't have a specific recommendation on the attendance. What we focused on was noting the struggle between slots being taken up and children not being there, and the way providers were not receiving funds if you weren't there but you still had to have a teacher as if the child were there, but you weren't getting funds for that. And so our recommendation was trying to figure out how to have that balance, how we figure out how to encourage attendance, but we're not leaving providers, they're not receiving the funds necessary for that slot. But I don't see any details in here, unless I'm missing it, within the proposed budget on the solution to that attendance issue.
That's a great question, Delegate. So if you look at slide 15, it's got the language. I think out of recognition that there's some unknown, and this is due in large part to the department, and along with the Department of Social Services, having to rely on very outdated technology for attendance tracking, recognizing that there is some work to be done around understanding what are the barriers being faced and how do we ensure that providers are not experiencing kind of the cost, right, of not addressing the barriers for children to come to preschool or to childcare. For that reason, the governor's budget does not account for any additional slots from attendance, right? So if you think about the chart that I shared with the number of slots and the language, what it does include is language that would explicitly charge the department to make sure across the three programs, because if you'll recall from the commission, we have slightly different policies across the three programs right now to revise and look at attendance requirements to incentivize better attendance and address barriers. So it is a language-only proposal at this time, recognizing until we get a better handle on what is keeping kids from care and school, it would be premature to try to sort of move kids out of those slots.
Mr. Chair.
Delegate Corner.
Thank you. I also don't see anywhere in the presentation, we spent a lot of time at the commission talking through federal changes that are coming, and there were things that we chose not to move forward on to wait and see what was going to happen with those federal changes. Could you walk, I just think it's beneficial, those of us who serve on the commission know about these things, but I think it would benefit everybody to understand what those issues are that might be impacting us.
Absolutely. There's a couple of key ones. So the first of which is historically, and some of you might say, what was the scenario pre-pandemic around co-payments? And there was a range. If you look at pre-pandemic, when child care subsidy was run entirely by the Department of Social Services, we charged co-payments not on a flat rate. We charged them as a percent of income, which ranged from 2% for our very low-income families up to 10%. The new federal rule that went into effect last year caps states at 7%. So again, Virginia is well within that, and everything proposed in the governor's budget would keep us in that. The second requirement is it requires states to move to pay by enrollment rather than pay by attendance. And this was a bill that was proposed last year. We met in the work group, I think, for the reasons of stability for provider payment, trying to strike a balance between paying based on enrollment, which is how the market works, but also encouraging attendance. Virginia has received a waiver through August of 2026 because we are currently contracting with an attendance tracking system that would allow us to pay based on enrollment, but also make sure that we're tracking attendance. The third requirement is that we pay prospectively, which means you have to pay up front rather than after or based on reimbursement. We also have a waiver. We need to explore how we put that in place once we have a better sense of attendance tracking. Also to a waiver through August of 2026. And lastly, it requires you to do a sort of contracted slots, right, where you work with a provider, less like a voucher, more like a contract with a private provider for slots, including slots for children with special needs. Mixed delivery is not officially child care subsidy funded, but it is functionally Virginia's contracted slots program. And so we're continuing to explore options on how we might sort of make the most of that. Again, the state has a waiver through August of 2026, but those four things are on the horizon for Virginia.
Delegate Corner.
Mr. Chair, one more question, if that's okay.
Do note it is Friday afternoon.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. So I note on the slide, I think it's 11, consensus on 4 policy levers. It's not noted on the slide, but I think it's important that the only reason our commission had these items was the caveat was any and all funding that we came up with out of these was to go directly back into early childhood slots. And I don't see it on this slide. Is it included as part of the recommendations in the governor's budget that any money saved and any changes in this shall be designated only for early childhood slots?
That is interesting. So the language is not in the current budget. The way, if you look at that chart with the numbers on where the slots come from, mathematically, every single dollar that's freed up through these policy shifts is going back into the budget, but it is not explicitly codified in that budget language.
You good? All right. Okay, Delegate Willett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Jenna, thank you as always for the super insightful presentation. We've got a lot of issues across the state and filling that gap. Certainly I hear from my constituents as much as anything on the child care gap. You may not necessarily have hard numbers on this, but I'm just curious. Employers providing child care subsidies, are you seeing trends there given how dire it is for some people out there?
Absolutely. So one of the things worth to note, and some of you might recollect from the fall, which feels like a century ago, that we do have a very unique pilot happening right now in partnership with the Early Childhood Foundation and the Ready region of Southwest Virginia. A large employer, Ballad Health, actually has been piloting Ready Together, which is an effort where the employer contributes $5,000 per employee, the employee contributes $2,000, and then the state uses mixed delivery dollars to make up the rest of the cost of the slot. What that does, and it's a good question, Delegate Willett, because that's why we're above enrollment on mixed delivery, because through getting employers to contribute, Southwest Virginia was able to make your dollars go further, right? So we could serve more than the initial amount of children. So that is a pilot. I understand there's probably legislation that will be coming forward to this body recommending a potential expansion of that pilot.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just one other quick question, if that's okay.
Delegate Willett.
Thank you so much. I'm just looking at the, going back to the slides, task before us about in terms of the agency defining hard to serve for exceptions to this. What is that? Do you have a preliminary idea at least what that's going to be? This is from slide 15.
That is, so we probably would engage some stakeholders on that, but I think you could imagine a scenario if it is a child with special needs. I think if there's a scenario where, for example, military families potentially, right, where the parent needs to be entirely gone, and, would that be a hard to serve? So our general guidance principles that we would draft guidance, identify based on our engagement with our local offices, our 120 social service offices across the state on what they're seeing as places where this would be the issue, keeping that family from working. Because again, remember, the purpose of the child care and development block grant is to sort of both support child development and to support working families. So it would be some combination of what is the circumstance of the child and where there are circumstances where not accessing after school or summer care would prevent that family or parent from working.
Thank you so much.
Delegate Bolivar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a couple of quick questions. And Jenna, I just want to thank you for all your work on early childhood education and two administrations at this point, and also on the commission. Thank you for answering Delegate Coiner's question with respect to the potential impacts because of federal rules and regulations. Do you have a sense of kind of the order of magnitude cost that we can expect in Virginia as a result of those changes?
So it's a great question. I think, and I hate to keep coming to the same answer, until we get a really specific handle on which kids are in which programs for how many hours. Right now, we sort of track it in terms of blocks, and that specificity will enable us to understand and track much more closely, where, and be with confident that this kid is being served on this day in a way that, because we have, and you may have heard about it in complaints from your constituents, the swipe card, and it's a lot of sort of backdating. You got to sort of manually submit piece, which makes it very hard for us to track it. That will give us a sense, Delegate, on how far off we are, to Delegate Coiner's point about when providers might not be getting paid because the family didn't show up, but they're making every effort to get it through. that is very opaque in our data right now, and that will end up being a factor. There'll be some one-time costs related to technology, but really figuring out the big ongoing costs will hinge on us getting that attendance tracking in place. We have a live contract, we have an executed contract, and we hope to have that on board within calendar year 2025.
Mr. Chairman.
Delegate Bullock. Thank
you. So I know you hit a little bit on co-payments, and I guess I just kind of want to put for the record that 7% is the federal maximum. I think on the commission, we didn't pick a number. We really just said that if we do that, and I think the idea was making sure that everybody had some skin in the game, that would go back into slots. But could you talk a little bit more about the 90-day job search requirement and kind of put that into a historical context?
Sure.
Because I do know that is associated with over 1,000 slots, and so I think it's important. I think we also discussed making sure that there was flexibility so that you didn't prematurely cut off somebody's childcare if it was looking like they might be employed, but not necessarily within that 90-day window.
Absolutely. So in this case, again, the federal law requires when somebody is eligible that you give them care for the year. And they might start with 15 hours and they might go up or down, but they are eligible for 12 months, right? So when we account for the funding of these slots, we have to account for that. The one exception in the federal regulations is if you lose your job. In that case, states are allowed to do 90 days. That's the minimum that you can go to. What this shift would do would say whether it's at the beginning of your process, you are maybe just had a child and are ready to return to work, that you can get child care subsidy for up to 90 days while you're looking for work, right? Because it's very difficult to find child care while you're managing, a baby, or if you lost your job, that you could have it for 90 days. The language also goes further than that and says that the local departments would have the ability to make an exception to add another 90 days. So in the scenario where you're trying to find a job, but maybe you're trying to work in state government, and we tend to take a little longer to hire, and you come and say, well, I've got this interview and I've got this offer, but I just need one more month, and then I'll be able to show you my pay stub and that I'm actively working. It would provide that discretion. The department would work closely with DSS to track that, but that is kind of the proposed compromise that sort of honors the federal minimum, goes a little further, and recognizes that families can work with their caseworkers if there is a need to go up to 180 days.
Delegate Boba.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And if you could also touch on the school-age child care aspect of this. I know we had, in our discussions at the commission, talked about prioritizing. I don't know that anybody talked about pausing. And I guess the concern, two concerns I was hoping you could help us out with, so particularly with families that have a school-age child, a first grader, second grader, and then somebody who's younger. How that works, because if one can't get the child care, that means the parent is going to have to, it's basically like denying them any slots at all. And then also with respect to hard to serve, how that would be implemented and defined so that it wasn't arbitrary.
Absolutely. So on the first question, I think, again, we would preserve the current number of slots. Out of a priority of birth to 5, which is the explicit language in last year's budget, right? And again, remember now your subsidy program is now 2/3 state funded, right? So these are truly sort of state dollars supporting these school-age kids. We've already seen really a significant drop in the growth of school age because there's just so much demand for birth to 5, and there's simply no other options. The goal here, rather than reducing the rates for anybody who's currently on the program, is really to sort of understand what do we know about 21st century, what local municipalities are doing, with the YMCAs, the Boys, Girls Club. We're just concerned that hour per hour, dollar per dollar, we're paying significantly more, and that might be sort of affecting a parent's choice. And so we might end up paying, $9,000 a year for this kid, in this program, and $2,500 a year for this kid in that program. And if the parents keep selecting the higher program, it becomes hard to control the cost on this. So the proposal in the work group is a very tight turnaround, a report that would be able to go to the commission this year that would sort of look at, and again, the language we're using is sort of right-sizing the rates rather than eliminating the program, but we're concerned based on the sort of hourly rate. And again, even as we've been taking infant and toddler kids and preschool kids off the wait list, those numbers are still persistently higher because there are simply no other options for that age group. So it's a kind of compromise on how do we not, in the program, right-size the rates, continue to serve school age so they're not in that phenomenon. To the point about hard to serve, we would codify it in guidance. We then send that out to local offices, do a webinar to prepare them on that. The scenario in which, so I think there's two scenarios. One is which the family says, okay, actually there is an option run by my county or my school, and we'll I can send my 7-year-old there and then have my 3-year-old at the child care center. If there are simply no other options for that school age, that potentially could be considered hard to serve. But we just know that there's a lot more options for school age, and we're just concerned that, often it's understandable, right, for both providers and families, if it's convenient, they're not necessarily paying attention to that full price tag, but we're just worried when we look at the totality of expenses that the state is paying a little bit too much in this area, while also understanding in order to support working families. I have a 7-year-old right now who's about to walk into after school at the Y, right? Like I'm only able to be here because of school age care, but it's really about the amount per kid, the amount per hour that is concerning us, and that's why it's the proposal for the pause.
One last question.
One very last question.
Thank you.
I appreciate it, Chairman Torian. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in terms of the commission was really the discrepancies regionally with respect to wait lists and the inability to even provide slots. And so was wondering if you could kind of talk about that. And then on that slide that you just went to, did notice that Fairfax County was actually missing from that. And so I assume that was not by mistake, but if you could speak a little bit to kind of regional discrepancies and where
Absolutely.
Additional funding would actually be helping in terms of the Commonwealth writ large.
Absolutely. So in your appendices, you have the child care subsidy program waitlist by locality. This is all the localities that have a waitlist. So if your locality does not have a waitlist, it is not on here. So what you see, and it's broken out by birth to 5 and by school age, and the total number again here is just over 12,000, just under 12,600. Fairfax County provides local vouchers and has significantly increased the amount of local funding supporting those vouchers. So there are 0 children on the wait list for Fairfax County thanks to that very significant local investment. I think, as just a reminder for the K-12 system, Fairfax County is 20% of the system. So if those local dollars were to go away, you would see these wait lists grow even more significantly.
Okay. Thank you. At the risk of receiving another question, I'll ask anyway. Are there any other questions? Okay. Ms. Conway, thank you so very much. We appreciate your work.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Any other business to come before the committee? If not, committee chairs will meet immediately in the library, and the rest of you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend.